For the latest top tips, reviews and advice, please subscribe below.
Hello and welcome to Attwoolls Outdoors with me, Mike. Today you guys a bit of a kind of almost like a explaining video or a tutorial video talking all about Vango's new single point inflation system. So what I'm going to show you essentially is how a single point inflation goes up, it goes down, and kind of almost the nitty-gritty details behind it in many ways to kind of give you a bit more clarity on what it's all about. So for example, in the tent range, the new model for 2021, which is quite revolutionary, they took their top end model, i.e. the Anantara TC3, and made it single point inflation. The whole point is single point inflation, that it's obviously, as the name suggests, you've got a single point where you can pump it up, so you can get something like an electric pump, like I've got here, pump it up and it'll basically distribute and pump up every single beam, so you haven't got to go do it individually. Now, let me start by getting it all set up, and throughout this video we'll sort of talk about it in how it's a little bit different to what we've seen in single point inflation in the past. So, the main thing I want to make sure before I do anything is make sure all the valves are actually shut. So, all of them are actually shut to do the kind of multi-point inflation, but then, so every one beam has its own point, you can do it individually, and then there's a separate chamber which inflates all of them up in one go. So once I've made sure all the ones are closed, I've put the caps back on, I can then go to, on the very front beam it always tends to be, the one valve point that's lower, and that's going to be my single inflation point. All I then do is insert my electric pump, twists, it locks on as with the kind of the Vango airspeed valve, and then we're good to go. For this I'm using kind of Vango's turbo pump, so it's a new pump for 2021, and just a typical power bank, so it means I can take this pump anywhere, I can be on the beach for all I care and still run it. So once we turn that on, make sure that's plugged in, we're setting it to about 7 psi, or with 7.5 on this as well, and then we'll go for it now. So the slight difference with this turbo pump is it's actually sort of 2 stages. So what you find is that it's got one stage to get volume air in, so it gets about 350 litres in at a time. So that way you're not having to, and then it's got a second stage which is a high pressure, so it basically builds pressure up. The single stage will, sort of dual stage anyway, in its first point it will get it round to about sort of just over the 1 psi mark, so it means it floods it. You can almost probably see now that air is actually going to the beams itself, and then once it normally gets a point, it automatically tends to kind of kick into that point, ready to go. Admittedly on this, on the model I've got here, I've got to manually do it just because it's a bit of a demonstration model. Admittedly you can tell the difference in terms of the tone, it's definitely a lot noisier, but I'll just come away a bit further so I can talk about it really. So the joys of sort of the point as well is that you can use electric pumping to pump it all up. It's very cunning the way they've done it, they've still made it usable for a multi-point inflation, so if you want to use your tent or your awning in the same manner that you always have and do each beam individually, you can happily do that. But you've got this new sort of functionality system where rather than being what other single point inflation has been in the past, where it's basically it's almost like kind of a circuit, so as soon as one goes, what you find that is, you know, you get a break in a circuit, it all goes down. With this, it's almost like a an inline circuit, so it carries on to the end, so it's got a one-way directional point from the front directly to the back. If for any reason there is a point along that way that doesn't inflate, it doesn't matter. You can still manually inflate the back 2 beams while you're sorting out the issue. So from a point of view of pitching it, you wouldn't really notice a difference. You would still carry on as normal, or use our electric pump like we have here. And like I said, it will just kind of go do the front, do the back, and sort of work its way back, keeping the overall temp sort of pressure all at the same level. And what you find the joys of using an electric pump, even though it's probably a bit slower than using a manual pump, being perfectly honest with you, is the fact you can sit back, relax like I am now, let it do the work, unpack the kit, unpack the car, and do what you need to do. What you also find is actually once it gets to a certain PSI, looking around about probably, oh I don't know, about 4 PSI, in theory what you can actually do is actually just push the tent up, it will sit in position, and what you're then going to benefit from is that as that electric pump keeps wanging the pressure up, getting the pressure up to where it needs to be properly firm and stable, you're already inside, putting the carpet in, putting the bedding in. It means that you're utilising your time a bit better and a bit more efficiently. Other things you can find is that, to be fair, like I said, it'll actually get it to a more accurate pressure. It'll cut off when it gets to the right PSI, depending obviously which pump. One thing I would say is you've got a Vango tent, you need to buy a Vango pump. Reason being is because the fitments and all that are quite unique, and Vango being quite cunning as they are, they make sure you've got to kind of buy their own product. So the new turbo pump, which I'm using now, almost replaces the old sort of Zephyr pump. So again, and they've also got a benefit, it's got inflate and deflate function, as well as actually being a bit quicker to inflate everything as a whole. But let's have a quick check and see how we're doing on the pressure of it. So we're up to about 2.5 psi. Like I said, this, to be fair, is probably the biggest tent you can pump up with a pump anyway. So it would take a naturally little bit longer, but like I said, I can sit back, relax, open a can of beer, and kind of go at my own manner. You've also got kind of Vango's sort of supersized beams, not as big, but you've got a larger capacity, so hence why it's probably taking a little bit longer than you would initially think. But I think looking on the round of the average point of around about probably 8 or 9 minutes to pump it up fully. If I'm being perfectly honest with you, I've kind of it was inflated, I've deflated it, so I haven't extracted all of the air that would be in there. So if you're opening it out from fresh and unpacking it sort of out the bag, you would find actually it might take a little bit longer than I'm showing you now, but it kind of gives you a bit more of an idea. I forgot to stop my stopwatch, oh bugger. But as you can see now, we're getting up to about firm enough pressure that it will kind of carry on. So what are we up to now? 3 psi. So to be fair, that's quite stable. So in theory I could actually let it go up completely. Alternatively, what I'm going to do now is go inside, help it up. So it's still a bit soft in here, but as you can see now, I can just go along, get everything kind of in place. At this point now, I wouldn't go to the extent of trying to peg it all out, just because you want to make sure it's at its firmest pressure when it's ready to peg out. That way you're not going to kind of over tension it. But now, like I said, things like going inside, sorting the bedding out, putting the carpet in, these sort of factors make things a little bit easier. Like I said, it's utilising your time as and when you kind of see fit. You haven't got to worry about that. That'll cut off when it gets to. You've got a cigarette lighter as well to go directly into the car or like into the power bank. So it doesn't also take a lot of draw off of it as well. Or for example, I really want to, I can put the little canopy pole in. The thing that really takes the time in this, to be fair, is going to be getting the pressure up. As you can see now, we're only about 4 psi. It runs about sort of a volume about 70 litres at high pressure, so it's still a very efficient pump. It's just the fact that there's so much air in this tent in comparison. If I use this same pump on a caravan awning, it would fly up in no time. It's just because you've probably got easily about 5 times the amount of air in this tent than you would kind of the in a caravan kind of version. So when you see kind of us use, and we've got a separate review video actually on kind of the turbo pump showing you almost how it's done individually. And we've also used it on sort of a single point inflation as well to show you kind of the differences. But in my ways, manual pump's always a bit quicker, but like I said, now you sit back, relax, let that do the work, you haven't got to kind of worry about it. We've got a separate pitching video, a pitching video of the kind of Anantara in the multi-point inflation. We've not yet done one with single point, but it's the same principle. But when you come to peg it, still do the main sort of kind of corners, you still then pump it up, but the only thing you'd use the electric pump rather than kind of a manual pump, and you guide it out. So the only thing that really changes from having a single point to a multi-point is that the pump system, you know, everything else is still running the same manner. And like I say, if you really want to, you can kind of go back to that still pumping the back beam up, middle beam up, and doing it like so. So it doesn't really make much of a difference. But when you look inside the system as well, it's a bit different. You haven't suddenly got beams that are running directly through the roof. What you've actually got is a very, very clever system where, as we say, as it kind of goes in an inline circuit, things move forward and back in that way. But located in actually the interconnecting part, you wouldn't notice it. You'd walk in there, and I didn't tell you it was a single point inflation. Arguably, I would say you wouldn't even realise that was the case. You've almost got this little kind of, sort of like a duct that runs along the base here into every single beam. And again, the joys of it, again, you don't have to, even though it will happily do it as you want it to, arguably, if you didn't want to, if you arguably have an issue, for example, it doesn't affect each beam individually. It's just the one, it's almost like you've got two systems. If one system fails, you can still use the second system as a backup. And that's kind of the joys of what they've kind of created. You can still go back to the same principle as just removing that, patching it, repairing it, or replacing it completely, putting a new beam in, and just fixing it in. And in terms of the hose, it's no different to like a gas kind of style, where you've got kind of like a tiered nozzle, a clear push fit sort of thing. It clops on there quite happily, and you can just then, admittedly, if you probably had a slight issue with the single point inflation, all you would essentially do is just the interconnected pipe, it would just a simple clamp would then stop it from doing it. So it's something that Vango have been working on for numerous years now, and I think, to be fair, what they've kind of done in little tweaks, they've refined it. And in terms of its launch date, they've been really sort of making sure it's absolutely dead perfect when it hits the market, because the last thing they want is something to go wrong with the system. And it's, like I said, it's a bit groundbreaking the way they kind of do it, and the way it feels inside is no different to a normal tent, or awning for the matter, but you've got that functionality that you can do what you want with it, really. So for me, I think it's a really nice addition. Something that obviously, yeah, again, costs a little bit more to do, but arguably I think people are willing to pay that for the quick and easy like I'm doing now. I'm not suddenly taking that pump from point A, B, C, D and E to get it up. There we go. So once we've got it all sorted, that comes off. You still put the capping as per normal. But yeah, that's kind of the simplest. This, you know, works really well. You've got all the flexibility of what you want to do. You can then, in theory, use that then pump to start doing the airbeds, but that kind of gives you a bit more of an idea about kind of the single point inflation with Vango that's available in their tent range and also in their awning range. So any more questions or queries, you can always feel free to follow the link below. Take you straight through to our website. We've got all different details on there as well as other videos we've got on the sort of system as well. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.